Well, we are now at 6 o'clock. If you wanna start us off, Chris.
Yeah. So this is fun. I've been thinking about doing this sort of thing for a while now because I've been on Clubhouse just checking out different rooms and figuring out the format. And I think this is kind of a cool format to eventually, I think have chat about actual gameplay of games. I think there's a lot of chats in here about like biz dev and like revenue and all this other kind of stuff, right? But there's not a lot of kind of talking about gameplay of games and the player experience. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of start this thing up and then we just kind of chat with devs about gameplay and design and things of that nature. And then it'd be cool to bring up other people in the audience to like involve them, ideally like players too, right? And get their thoughts. And, I always liked BlizzCon and the format of BlizzCon because you can sort of, engage with the player base. I think that's like one of the best parts about it. And so
Hmm.
I think this is a promising platform for the opportunity to do that. And so um, let's just maybe go around and introduce ourselves because we have some people here, but we also have, Kevin's stream as well. So
Right.
um, my name is Chris Clakey, game designer of 13 years, working at Blizzard on like classes and PvP and systems and all those sort of things. I actually have worked kind of with this entire panel in some way. But when I first started, I was actually working with Kevin. Kevin was kind of my mentor on a team and kind of showed me how to how to actually, really kind of build spells and work on gameplay and learn how to use WoW Edit and all that. So it's really fun to bring Kevin in here. And yeah, that's me. And maybe Candace, you can go.
Hi, I'm Candace Thomas. I also worked on World of Warcraft with Chris, and yes, there was some overlap with Kevin Jordan, and I promised I would tell the story. So, uh, to me, Kevin Jordan was this legend. When I joined the team, everyone said that he was the vision holder for class design for World of Warcraft, and as part of as one does whenever you are a 24-year-old woman breaking into the game industry, you're terrified that people are going to find out that you are an imposter, like you are a fraud. And so I thought that the smartest thing was to never open my mouth to you, even though now I know that that's like the most ridiculous thing. I just I thought that I would keep my head down, I would do my work, I would work really hard, and then eventually, I would be good at making games.
Right.
So yeah, I actually wanted to say like thanks for coming, and I I really respect and admire you, and I really regret that I didn't use you as a resource whenever I was like a blooming designer.
Right.
But that to finish that, so I started in games in about 2007, so I'm about 14 years in the industry now. um, I made games like World of Warcraft, Diablo 4. I went to Amazon Game Studio for like a hot second to work on their Lord of the Rings MMO. But now I'm a principal game designer at Riot, working on the new MMO. So that's me,
Exciting.
and I'll pass that to Luka.
Cool. Thanks, Candace. My name is Luka Fusi. I am an audio designer. I've been working in games for just about 10 years now. I was working in the Seattle area for a number of years. I was at Microsoft. I worked at PopCap on a game called Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. I worked contract on The Witness and one or two other titles for a group there. I was on Destiny 2 for a little bit, just hopping around. And then I met Chris when I was at Blizzard for a year, and here's the storm. I know of Candace. I'm just meeting both her and Kevin really today. I also think Kevin's a bit of a legend, so I'll just fall in line with that. And as for my connection to this entire panel, I hope to bring kind of like an audio designer's perspective on some of the things I've like experienced in Valheim that pull me in, that feel good. I've gotten not quite as obsessed as this game as everyone else, but I'm not far behind. So yeah, happy to be here. And I'll throw it to Kevin.
Wow. Thank you guys so much. I'm blushing. I can't even talk right now. You guys are too kind. Yeah, my name's Kevin Jordan. I am one of the original 3 game designers for World of Warcraft. It was my first game, and I still just feel so fortunate to have had the opportunity to work on it. I think it turned out really well. And I learned so much from some amazing people that were obviously all around me at Blizzard and on the team, etc. From there, in 2010, I left the company and went to work at another company called Cryptozoic Entertainment, where I worked on several board games and Hex, Shards of Fate, which was a digital trading card game. And then after that, I went to Obsidian for a couple of years, where I worked on a couple of games, but mostly on Tyranny, which was a CRPG. That was super fun to work on. Really proud of that one also. But yeah, I've only really worked with Chris. I worked at the same time on the team as Candace. I'm sad that she never introduced herself. I love talking to younger designers, and yeah, it's a missed opportunity anyway. But yeah, thank you guys so much for the invite and letting me join the panel. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited about just chatting about games.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me actually underlining something important that you said, yeah, this is like going to be a casual, conversation between four almost strangers, and then I think eventually we'll invite you guys to come talk to us as well. But I wanted to underline, Kevin said that he made board games for a while after leaving Blizzard, and some people think that that's not like game design cred. I've worked with a lot of contractors now who are trying to break into the video game industry, who have worked on board games before, and they say, "Oh, I don't know if my skills are transferable." And I say, "Are you kidding me? Like board games are all about designing a simple and like understandable set of rules, right? And really that's all video games are. It's like there's the rules of combat, and here's the rules of our systems, and here's the rules of how you level up." And so I just like to also extend on how legendary Kevin Jordan is, that the fact that you can make board games successfully for that many years just goes to show, like, this is a person who is an expert in ludology and the study of rules, and we're all like very blessed.
The very funny thing about your comments there is that I had a pretty humbling moment when I went to Cryptozoic, because I went into a design meeting with a bunch of guys that were working on the WoW TCG, which was still under their care at the time. And I was coming off from WoW, and I'd worked in the industry for over a decade, and I was feeling pretty good about my credentials, right? And I was in a room for 5 minutes with those guys talking about card game design, and I realized I didn't know jack diddly about card game design. So it was a really humbling moment, and also just led into an amazing learning experience. So they are different skill sets, but they're extremely transferable. And I've learned and grown so much having had the opportunity to work on a card game and board games as well as the digital games. So yeah, for anyone out there who's developing those skills, they are absolutely transferable, as Candace said. And they're really good at rounding out your skill sets in terms of different types of experiences for different kinds of gamers. And at the end of the day, game design is just about creating an amazing experience. So there's tons of different ways to do that in a wide variety of games. So don't think that it's a wasted effort.
Totally. I do a lot of mentoring and speaking for young women in games, and often the first question they ask me is, what can I do? How can I sharpen my skill set for making video games? And I always say, make a board game. Like make something fun. I talk about chess. I say, can you imagine what chess would be like without rules? Like what if you could just move the pieces, and like it's just a bunch of pieces on a board. It's not fun unless you have the rules. And so if you can come up with like the mindset of making fun rules and fun gameplay like that, and you can do it with construction paper and drawing pretty figures. You can order a blank board game set on Amazon and make a ridiculous scavenger hunt board game. You can do whatever you want. And so I always start with, like, even if you have no technical skills, if you have a pen and paper, you can still make a game. Anyway, that got really deep. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Yeah, so I one of the main topic what I made this chat after is I really want to talk to you guys about Valheim, because this is a game that I've been playing a lot in the last month or so. since it really kind of blew up. And I think there's so many like really cool design elements in the game, and I think the way that I wrote a little blog post about this, about like, I really feel like they focused on the player experience, and you could really feel that in the game. They have a lot of elements that are kind of similar to WoW and to core RPGs and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to get your guys' take on the game generally.
Who wants to start?
Who wants to start? Well, I'll jump in. What's significant for me with Valheim is that it's the first of these type of games that I've actually like really glued to. And I know, I still probably have like under 100 hours, but this genre is not super new. I mean, Rust, I remember going and doing raids on random teenagers' huts and hideouts in like 2013. So it's been out for quite a while, but like for some reason, they just never really have a gravity to me. Like, because servers can get wiped so quickly, and because they just explode into chaos, I don't know. I've never like stuck on the treadmill of playing one of these. They always just feel like I'll jam on it for a weekend and go. But there's just something about Valheim that's extremely pleasant to be in and feels continuous and like worth investing in. That, it's tough to articulate, but it's the same sort of feeling you might have if you go and you start playing an MMO and you just have that sense. It's kind of like, with anything, like the collective valuation of, is this worth spending time in? And with some games, you just can tell like, nah, it's not really. I don't feel like this is quote unquote going anywhere. And Valheim does for me, which is funny because it's totally non-competitive and you can play it totally single player. So yeah, I would just like to hear you guys maybe unpack a bit of maybe why you think it has that effect. Like, what is it about this one that has kept you guys around? Or do you all play the genre a whole bunch, or?
Yeah, I mean, I could unload if you guys want. So for me, it's about it's kind of less about the handcrafted experiences that many AAA games will provide for you. Like there will be a cool like Michael Bay moment in a video game where there's like you're in the heat of combat and it's been tuned just perfectly and just scripted like just exactly, and then you get the big explosion at the end, and then you're the hero, and those are all really cool moments. But I think what's unique to Valheim, and I'll explain why it's different than Rust to me also, is that every story is your story that you're telling. And yes, of course, some of them will be expected. Like an example is when I first started playing Valheim, I jumped onto a server of people that were super, super progressed. And so I knew nothing about the game. And they're like, just get on the boat. Just come with us. Come on, take a sword. Let's go. And I was like, hell yeah, like sign me up. I'm a Viking. And we got on this boat and we saw this island, and they said, oh, get your pickaxes out. We're gonna get on this island. We're gonna get whatever this new ore is. And they explained to me that ore is very important in the game. And then as we're mining on this little island, the island comes to life and it sinks. And we're like, what's going on? Like, what just happened? We're all like in the water. We have no stamina left because we were just mining. We're drowning to death because like we got on the back of what was essentially like a big turtle. We're like, what is this thing?
Wait, what? I mean, I guess this is
Spoilers.
a spoiler cast now, dude. All right,
spoilers big time. But that kind of stuff happens left and right. Like we were out mining copper. It's always an ore related story in this game, but like we're out mining copper, and all of a sudden something larger than we had ever seen. It's a troll, by the way, with blue skin comes up, and it's like this huge forest troll, and it's like the camera shakes, and all of a sudden one of us is dead, and we look over and we're like, run from this thing. And so we run to our little hut because we'd made our little sleeping hut and with like a little chest, and then the troll came over and smashed the hut and killed all of us. And that was just so unexpected, and it was so unscripted. It was just one of those moments that you can't buy that kind of exploration. So what I wanted to unpack was the difference between that and a game like Rust, or a game that like is a campaign based like narrative experience, is that like, yeah, one, it's your story, and that it's all about the exploration. It's like we were out doing this thing and we found this thing, and that's super cool. And then to delineate that from the Rust experience, where Rust is actually, I mean, it's a survival crafting game like Valheim, but actually it's a completely different genre. Rust is a battle royale. It's an elimination game where you play until somebody kills you and robs you of all your stuff, and then you have no intrinsic desire to play anymore, right? Whereas like this is a very different story. This was, we went out together and we explored and we did this thing, and it was, and we found something. Whereas the Rust story is, we killed some people and we became top dog on the server. And now I'll like get off of my soapbox, but I think that Valheim has like the greatest player stories, the kind of stuff you want to tell your friends just happened to you in a video game. And it feels so authentic because it's your story, and maybe someone else didn't experience it that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's actually really important. One of the things I talk about a lot is games that generate stories, and how important that is. Like, and this goes way back to kind of when we were making WoW. When I used to listen to the stories around the water cooler, around the office, because tons of people were playing EverQuest, and a lot of the stories boiled down to, we sat at a specific camp in a specific dungeon and we farmed it for 5 hours and then we got this piece of loot, right?
Yeah.
And I was always really disappointed with that story, right? And it's a very common story. But I had come from Ultima Online, where the player stories to me were much richer in that sense, because they involved interactions between players and unexpected events and all kinds of just basically chaos, right? Or things that they're taking you and putting you in an uncomfortable place, right? Outside your comfort zone. And that's what Valheim is very good at, and what actually causes a lot of those stories to emerge is because you're outside your comfort zone. When you're always playing a game within expected parameters, right? Like there's no surprises, then it kind of plays out exactly how you expect it to. And it also plays out the same for all kinds of different players. So there's nothing to share between the two of you. It's like, did you go and do the thing yet? Yeah, I did, and that's the end of the story. But in a game like Valheim, it's they did such a great job of making you feel uncomfortable. Like some great examples are, the fatigue system. When you get cold and wet, it makes you sluggish. So you actually want to go home and sit in your home next to the hearth and warm up, right? It's a very subconscious thing, but they did an amazing job at making you hate being out in the world for too long because you get cold and wet and tired. And that's when things get a little trickier, because if you have to fight, you have less stamina available, and so you feel sluggish, and it feels harder to kill the things on your way back than it was on your way there. And then on top of that, like again, the player interaction, if you're playing multiplayer with everyone doing crazy things and having their own objectives, there's just constant opportunity for people to do crazy things, which are then stories that are created that you can share with your friends, right? And if I think about like why is Twitch successful, it's because people want to share these stories, right? And they get to do it live now on Twitch, right? But back in the day, we loved telling stories as well. Like each of us have these amazing stories from our lifetime of playing games that we probably repeat to people way too often, right? But they're momentous occasions for us. And so games that have consistently created stories that we take with us for the rest of our lives, that's where it's at for me. And when it comes to game design, delivering a good experience, and games that deliver an experience that we've all come to expect now, especially in PvE, which are about progression and the treadmill and things like you guys had already illustrated. That's not enough. Like, I feel like we can do better, and Valheim has done a great job at that. The execution of what is not a new thing in terms of like the game model. It's not like they've created a brand new genre here. It's just a game with some survival elements, some building, and exploration and progression. But the way they've executed it is so masterful that it generates these stories and it creates these moments of discomfort and creates the basic concept, or the basic playing out of the life experience, right? Which is struggle and success and loss and all those other things. So it's just been masterfully executed.
Yeah, I think it's funny when we talk about stories, what's always interesting, it's just really like stories are so core to the human experience as well. Like whenever we think about like our lives or when we talk to other people or when we meet them, we always think about ourselves or these things in a story, right? And yeah, I think this is like so important in modern game design, especially when you talk about Twitch or all these things like that, or if the game goes viral, is that whenever I talk with anybody about Valheim, they always talk to me about a story of their experience in the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like a lot of other games, it's just very narrative driven. You go to A to B to C to D or whatever, and the designers make encouraging you to go there. And I think really open-ended design where you just kind of give them the environment and just let them go. I think that's really what players are after these days.
Yeah, I think timing was also on Valheim's side. When you think about what you were saying about reflecting on the human experience and how we love to share stories and grow upon and with each other with anecdotes and lessons learned and all that stuff, I also think about how it mimics kind of like so in a AAA narrative driven game or an RPG, there's this role that you take on and you decide, I'm going to pick up the shield and I'm going to be the tank and and I understand what that role is for myself, hopefully. Or I understand that I will take the role of a healer, or maybe I will take the role of a damage dealer or whatever. These games are very different, these crafting games, and this is something that was similar with Rust as well, these survival games, where your role isn't based on your weapon or your ability in combat. It's kind of where you are in society. Not society, but like, for example, I am the kind of player in survival games that I love to build the base. I love to organize. I love to farm. Like, I love to show love to my friends by saying, hey, I got you a bunch of iron and now you can make that sword. And that's the role that I take. And in Rust, it was I took that same role, but it was as a different support. Like I didn't like to go raid other people's bases because I felt like it was harmful and mean to do that. But I did like to make sure everybody had the stuff that they wanted. And the reason I think that timing is really key right now is because people don't have their tribe in real life, with the pandemic.
Yeah,
And
totally.
so
Right.
now they can have this group of people that likely they're already friends with. You're probably playing Valheim with your small group of friends because there's a max of 10 on a server.
So
But
just to clarify, you prefer being the arms dealer to the guy actually committing the atrocities? Is
yes,
that
absolutely. Yep,
okay?
I will supply you
One
with
step distant from the actual.
I just mine the iron. I don't want to know what you're doing with it.
Right.
That's it.
take the C4. I'm not going to ask any questions. I know you're going to come back with a bunch of AKs, and
Fair
I'm
enough.
just going to look the other way. But yeah, so I was just going to say, like, it's an important game right now because it's about making a tribe, and it's about making friends, and it's about coordinating all of your efforts. And I feel like people are starved for that right now. So
Mm-hmm.
Is Valheim this year's Animal Crossing?
yes.
Okay.
You know
I
what?
think
The
they're
other
also
thing
just
too, Kevin.
starved by good PvE games, right? Like you were saying before, like so many of them are on that path, that where they end up feeling like I've watched a television show at the end of it, like, and the story you can share with your friends is I've watched the end of the series. I watched episodes 1 through 10, and it was over, and I enjoyed it. But you don't outside of that, you don't get to share any unique stories. But what Chris was saying was like, yeah, we start talking about Valheim, and the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is a specific, unique story to them that changes, from person to person, and that's why it's so captivating.
I'm actually
Yeah.
super curious to hear what Luka thinks about the sound design of Valheim, because I picked up on some little things, but I am very untrained. Is there anything that struck you about some like clever tips or tricks that they did that made something feel more immersive or contributed to that player story?
The deer sounds.
Yeah, dude. so right off the bat, we should say I have never heard a deer make a sound at all in real life. And the deer in this game, it's like someone must have found some just, just over and over again, man.
Wow, that's really
It's
good.
like someone must have found one or two deer sounds that they loved, and they left the probability play chance at 100% to just show them off. And to be honest, actually, that's like kind of one of my gripes with it, because when you're first starting out, they're the only things really that you hear, and typically you want to use audio to try to call your attention to something. And if you're like a naked Viking out in the woods and you don't know what to do and it's getting dark, any sound you hear, you're going to be kind of weird about. You're going to be trying to find out what's up. Once I realized it was the deer, I was like, these aren't even threatening me. It was a little disappointing, So that is my main gripe. But overall, the sound design in Valheim it's what it needs to be. This isn't really like, first off, the game's in early access, so any roughness that's there is to be expected. Like, that's what the polish phase is about. I know how it is. You just try to get something in to just validate this system's working. Goblins are making sounds when I hit them. They're propping it all up right now. But it's not really a canvas for doing extremely imaginative, crazy sounds. I find it's a very gritty feeling, real sort of game. That kind of PS1 voxely nature sort of lends itself to that too. So the sound that's there does a really good job of just pulling you into the world in this kind of elemental way. I mean, it's a lot of ambiances. There's a lot of quiet. And, going into buildings and standing next to fires while it's raining outside. I think the storm audio is actually really killer.
Yeah, the howling and
it's great, but a lot of the sound design in this game gets to sing because it's not a very crowded mix. Like, there's just not a lot going on, which, to be completely honest, is how real nature is. Everyday life is, noisy chaos all the time. If you're standing out in the middle of some, Norse forest, you're going to hear some wildlife, but, the smallest thing's going to break the silence. So I like the quiet there, because everything you do just gets like center stage very easily. You don't have to do any crazy kind of mix tips with, let me pull down the sound of 8 other people with guns so that I can hear my special, charging up. It's like it's very austere, and I think it works. Like I said, the reason I've glued to Valheim, besides the stories and everything else, is like, it's just a world that feels good to be in. Whatever you're doing, you just want to hang out there, which is that counts for so much. And it's not something you would necessarily think to design for, I think, in a game like this, but it makes everything easier. It floats the rest of the boats.
Yeah, I think something, sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
I'd like to point out a really important thing about Valheim is that, like you were saying, like early access element, like Valheim is average to below average in a number of important areas, right? Like, the character models don't look great. The animations are real sloppy in some places, they do hit it out of the park on some of the atmospheric stuff for sure. But to me, all of that points to how good the design is, because it's been so popular despite some of these failings, despite some of this average kind of stuff. And when you talk about like the design execution of, like, that was a conscious choice to do some of the sounds and make it, like you were saying, kind of quiet a lot of times, deer notwithstanding. All very, again, just masterful execution, and like the decision making of what is the purpose of this and what is the purpose of that. There's very little waste in Valheim. Like, everything that's in the game is there for kind of a specific designed purpose, and that's why I love how it's been executed.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to me, the difference between minimalism and just not owning any shit is when it feels very intentional. And like, this game, I think, can pull off a lot of minimalist elements because what's there is incredibly satisfying. So, it's allowed to feel a bit bare in spots. It's intentional.
Yeah. I was going to say that the negative space element that you talked about is really interesting, because I hadn't even considered that. I remember back to my player story when I got to a point where I needed a lot of deer hide, and I hadn't noticed that that noise was even the deer. I honestly thought it was just like an ambient track of something, because also I didn't know what deer sound like.
Mhm.
But then I realized, like, oh, this, yeah, it's intentional. Like Kevin was saying, this happens for a reason. And the reason is that the deer have a large, like, awareness radius of the player. And if you walk within that awareness radius, they run away, right? And so that incentivizes you to crouch down and stealth and get your bow out, and,
That's
and you
right.
get to feel like a real huntsman in the forest, right? But it's
Hunting deer is a very satisfying experience because of the way they've built it up.
totally, and they only
Yeah,
live
stealth.
in amongst the trees. They live where it's safe, like real deer would. But and the problem is that you can't, and it's problem solving, like Luka was talking about. Like, it's all very minimal. The reason that they bark is because you need to know when you're around a deer, because likely by the time you see them, you'll have already scared them away. And so when I learned that I can listen for those barks and that it's directional and I can know which way the deer was, I felt like I'm the master hunter now, like I'm the hero. And I thought that was really interesting,
Mm.
because
Yep.
to contrast that in a game like Rust, which was its like soul sister predecessor, is like the PvP version of that game, sound design is used very differently and very also intentionally. Sound design in Rust is you're always listening out in case there's a player nearby, because you're terrified that they're going to kill you and rob you, right? So
Oh my
they
God,
do
the sound of
things like
Kind of like
footsteps in Rust
Theorycraft,
is
yeah.
just ugh.
terrifying, right? And whenever you go out to mine or cut down trees, you have to be wary of the noise that you're making, because you're essentially like g- uh, you're emitting a mating call, except it's for violence, right? So you're constantly aware of the noises you're making. And so even though the game like seems similar, it's just funny how that relationship with sound has completely changed when you go from a game like PvP Rust to PvE Valheim.
Yeah, I think, in what was interesting, there was an interview with the developers, I think Iron Gate is what called, the developers of Valheim, and they asked them, did you play a lot of survival games as a reference for this game? And they actually said no, not really. They based a lot of their design decisions off games that like Breath of the Wild and WoW and things like that. And I thought that was really interesting, because you guys are talking about like negative space, and that is something I thought Breath of the Wild does very well, right? Not crowding out the world with overcrowded with creatures or NPCs or whatever. And yeah, Valheim does a really good job with that. It makes it more immersive. It encourages you to just, navigate around looking for raspberries or whatever it is. And yeah, I think that's another really great aspect of the game.
The other thing I wanted to mention as to why I think what I think gives games a good reputation, and this is kind of aside to the genre or the kind of the meta of the game. I think when when players quit playing your game, that's a moment that's really important. Um, because if quit because they're full and they're happy, that's a you need to play this game. Like I didn't finish it. I never killed Ganon because blah 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 blah. But um, if people because they're frustrated, which often, like when people quit Rust, maybe they'll rust because they're frustrated, or if they quit a game that they never got the loot drop they wanted, or they couldn't beat the boss at the end, like me and Sekiro. When you leave a game full and happy, and you could kind of push away from the table saying, I've had enough and I really enjoyed this, as opposed to like, I have to rage this game, or this game left me unsatisfied in some kind of way. I think that's really important. And so that's important to like the player story, and to making people want to play with you, is like, you can play this game, you can eat at this game buffet for as long as you want. And you know what? When you're done, that's okay. Like, you can walk away and I can still play the game, which is also like really, really, really important for a cooperative experience.
Yeah, and it puts you in a frame of mind where you're excited for the next bit of content they're going to make too, so you can return happily. That was always a big thing for a lot of MMOs, for people that had played too much. Like, they could never leave normally. Like, they had to delete all their items and destroy their characters. And it's just like they had to set fire to everything so that there was no chance they'd come back. And they ended up coming back anyway, right? But it's such a contrast to, like, yeah, I played that game and I loved it, and I'm really excited for the next bit. Like, I think a lot of games and developers, companies have lost track of, that goal is to make sure when people are done, they leave happy. Like they're trying to keep you fixated on your game well beyond their exhaustion point through, gambling mechanics or addiction mechanics or whatever it is. And it feels less honest, like Valheim feels really honest
Mm-hmm.
in its design and their business approach, right, to making a game. And that's why it feels like such a work of art, because you can believe that what they're trying to do is give you an honest experience and a fun experience. You don't feel like, they're going to nickel and dime you. So such a different approach, that's super refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other dynamic of the game too is, a really funny story that I saw, one of the funniest ones is, as you know, you can kind of tame the boars, right, and breed them, etc. But you could also tame the wolves, and people tamed the wolves, and then the wolves kind of got loose and started going around the world breeding, and then the entire overworld was filled with wolves that were allied with the players, and it, and I thought that was really interesting because that was always kind of the original sort of aspects like that were kind of the original vision of like, Ultima and things like that, where basically creatures would breed and it would have an effect on the overworld.
Yeah, the ecology that they tried to bake in.
Is that why that patch note said that they had reduced the rate that wolves breed? Because that makes total sense. Or is like procreation rate minus 5% or something, which I thought was oddly specific and no one asked for.
I remember reading the patch notes. I don't remember that one, but I remember that deer sound frequency was increased. So the whole list was kind of trolly. But I can't remember if I don't know if that's the list you read or a different one. But.
Can you imagine the player story though? Like you're breeding a bunch of wolves and you're like the wolf breeder for your friends. And then all of a sudden the world is taken over by wolves, and suddenly someone comes on a Discord and they go, "Who let the dogs out?" I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
That was a very long joke for Who Let the Dogs Out, and I had to make it.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, we're past a half hour, and I kind of wanted to bring some.
You just triggered Chris's segue. Yeah.
Well,
right.
and
We're all checking our watch after that.
Yeah, that wordplay means.
I did want to give the opportunity to bring people up who'd like to chat. We're in our humble beginnings here. This is our first episode, but we do have Kevin's listeners on his stream as well, which is some of my favorite audience because they're so like really, really knowledgeable about games and MMOs and virtual worlds and stuff. So I see, Rachel's here. Rachel is a friend of ours, used to work at Blizzard, works at Bonfire, where some other Blizzard developers are. Rachel, if you're interested, we can bring you up as well. I kind of left open the raised hand, so if anyone's interested to add to discussion or bring up their point of view, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll bring you up. But yes, I didn't want to segue you there, Candace, but
Put your hand up also if you want Candace to never make that joke ever again.
Oh, there you go. If I'm no longer welcome on the podcast, I brought you up, Rachel. Hello, thank you.
Hi, my hand was totally not up to not have Candace jokes. I love Candace jokes.
They are amazing. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm doing fantastic. I wanted to talk a little bit about how the fact that the quality of the art just does not matter even a little bit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
As the artist in the room, actually, that was one of the things that surprised me when I hopped onto Valheim and I was like, wow, everything is ugly. This is so gross. I'm only going to last 5 minutes. And 10 minutes later, it didn't even matter.
You're hooked. Yeah. Again, the game design saves it. Right. But I will say that there are a lot of, I think, beautiful vistas and the environment effects. And so there is really amazing art in places, but what we've come to expect from character models and animations, I think it's below.
Yeah, it's really shocking the amount of beauty that you get out of just the atmospherics and the water shader and it's the environment. It's not the characters. It's not the VFX.
Yep.
It's not even the ground textures or the building material textures. All of that is subpar, but I think it's subpar for a reason, because this is one of the quickest downloads I've ever had. Someone was like, hey, try this with me. And I was like, oh, 10 minutes later, even less, here I am.
Right. And the question you end up asking yourself is, well, is it better than Minecraft? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's an important inspiration and kind of like a very important bar to set for the art expectation. So yeah, I'm curious though, did anyone else notice, because I feel like I've done a lot of development in Unity and in Unreal lately, and I feel like if you look at the free stuff, or if you look at the stuff you can buy from the marketplace, I noticed that shape language everywhere. It's like whenever you, like for Luka, like sound design, remember like the first time you heard the Wilhelm scream, and now it's like everywhere because you know it's part of like a free package of sounds.
Sure. There are some sounds you just don't touch. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So I find myself doing things like looking for the shape language of assets I recognize from the marketplace, and then seeing like who retextured this, how did they do this? Because it's still very impressive that a team of what is 4 people made this game. But I actually wanted to ask you, Rachel, did you ever get to the point where you had either a stag breaker or a sledgehammer, an iron sledge?
Yeah.
Okay, that VFX actually impressed me. Like, given the rest of the game and the fidelity of the rest of the game, I saw that, and I was like, man, that looks like something that like
somebody would have created. Yeah. Yeah, totally. It feels like most of it is just like you can see the square texture. Like square textures are a big no-no in VFX, and you can see them everywhere. But you're totally right. That sledge, the big like I'm hitting goose now sledge is like, wow, that's incredible. It actually looks nice. It's kind of weird to see the contrast. I'm wondering if, because they're so early access and it's such a small team, if they're going to be leveling up the art, or if that's like not even on their radar and they're like, this art is just fine.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see how they proceed from here, because they definitely have the resources now to see out their vision. So if they were held back because of that, that's, a whole new.
Yeah, I heard the
question. Do you guys think it would be worth it, or do you think they should put their effort into a new game? Like, is it worth it to remaster that game? Would they actually get a good ROI? Would people rebuy the game, or would it be more popular than it is right now? It's a fascinating thought.
I don't know if I would remaster the game, but I think, they could invest a little more on the new biomes perhaps, or adding different assets. I think there's still a lot they could add to the game, and they have a whole roadmap of things they want to add.
Right.
And so, yeah.
For me, it's just about them seeing out their vision. Like, does it bother them that it looks the way it does? If it doesn't, then proceed, double down. But if it's one of those things that they're just living with because they didn't have the resources, then yeah, by all means, use the resources to chase the dream you actually wanted to put together in the first place. But
yeah,
I think they've established a lot of trust with us, right? Like, what they've created so far, like, we're excited to see what they do next. So there's a lot of trust between us and them, and we should let them, we should let them run with it.
Welcome to stage, Tips.
Hey, what's up, guys? Is this working?
Hey, Tips, how you doing?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yep.
Good. Nice to meet everybody. What's up, Kevin? How's it been hanging, man?
Real good. Happy fatherhood to you again. Belated, of course, but
appreciate it. My name is Tibbs. I work on the ops side for a gaming org called OTK. We recently hosted a Valheim tournament about a week or so ago, and we were really happy with the results. A lot of the guys have been playing the game, enjoying it. But you guys brought up some really cool points today. I wanted to ask you about specifically with regards to like zone design, sound design, and narrative, and like it kind of all rolls together. I feel that sense of minimalism and how there really is no narrative driver throughout the game, and that's something I noticed that really hooked me. It reminds me a lot of like Dark Souls, for example, where you have there's something going on kind of subsurface, and there are things, and if you pick up certain items, you can read the text, and you can connect all the different items together to kind of tell a narrative, but it's not really in your face. And I'm curious how you guys think that approach applies, whether it be the minimalism in the storytelling, the minimalism in the sound design, environment design. How does that apply to like to MMOs? Who I think we've seen like a lot of over design in MMOs nowadays. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on, could that same design logic be applied to like more massive games where there's so much else going on.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Go for it.
Yeah, Kevin.
Absolutely. I think some of the people's fondest memories of good games come from that sense of like being shown, not told, what the story is, right? Like Fallout has traditionally used this to great effect. Dark Souls, as you mentioned, original World of Warcraft as well. Like there's a whole story going on within Blackrock Depths, which is one of the greatest dungeons of all time, right? And some of it is quest driven, but a lot of it is just, this is a living place. And if you pay attention, you can parse out what's going on here and how these people live or how these creatures live and everything else going on. So I think it's particularly important for games like an MMO because the players are supposed to be involved in that sense of discovery and exploration and sharing their opinions, essentially collaborating socially to work out what are the mysteries here, where are the secrets, and not just be kind of hand told everything that by the hand, like they more modern MMOs do. So I think it's actually really important and far more appropriate in MMOs because of all the other things that MMOs are trying to do. But it's been consistently used in a lot of single player games as well to really good effect. And Valheim is no different. I love it.
I think also that it just depends on what you're going for in your game. And as long as you keep it consistent, I think that's what I kind of think that's the beauty behind like pretty much every AAA Japanese game I've played is it's either a complex, deep system or it's a simple premise, and they never really stray over the lines. And what I mean by that is like, if you think of a spectrum of storytelling where there is the, I think we call it in games, we call it like the theme park, where, there's a bunch of zones, and the analogy there is that every time you ride a roller coaster, it's going to be the same, right? And it's just taking people, cart by cart through this scripted, the Magic Castle, not Magic Castle, the Wild Frogs, Mr. Frog's Wild Ride or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's the narrative's never going to be different. Everyone's going to go through it, and you're just sort of going to wait your turn to do it. And then there's like the opposite end of the spectrum is like a true open world sandbox game, almost like Dark Souls, where there's no cinematics, the story that you get is whatever story you choose to absorb, and that's okay. And as long as you never mix those two too much. So example, if your World of Warcraft player is expecting to understand why the villain is a villain, and you don't do a good job of putting that in the player's face, then they're going to walk away unsatisfied. And the opposite is true for a game like maybe not Dark Souls, but like a very true sandbox game where if suddenly you're in this immersive Valheim experience and then there's just like a random cinematic that's 3.5 minutes long, it's like, all right, let's explain this whole world. We're going to talk about the Forsaken. We're going to talk about why the stag is a fucking ghost. Like, I think that's whenever you defy the expectations of your audience, and then it becomes weird. So I don't think there's like a right or a wrong approach. I think it's just like staying true to the identity of your game. That's the most important. But yeah, I think the MMO hasn't explored like far enough away from the theme park like version of narrative. So the end.
No, that's a really good point. I like the mix. That it definitely, like, I think of a lot of examples where they did in hindsight try to mix things up, whether it was intentional or due to lack of resources or whatever, where there are points in World of Warcraft where something happens and you're just kind of like, wait a minute, I didn't get the full, like, why did this happen? There's like this big twist or something like that. And I feel like part of it is, the game is so massive and it's played over such a long period of time. You're not just playing for, 2 to 12 hours and the game's over. You're potentially playing over hundreds of hours. And so the message gets lost. But yeah, I actually think that's a really cool point. I haven't heard that perspective before.
I don't think there's anything that I could add over the top of what Chris and Kevin might say, or like, even Asmongold might say, as to MMOs being sort of over-designed and the questions of respecting the player and leaving space for discovery there and not making things so explicit. Like I've absorbed a ton of those debates and I think they're all great. But what this Valheim is making me think of on the topic of minimalism and and sound and just everything. Again, actually, is this is where I'll get on my pedestal and talk about The Witness for a few minutes, because it is just like one of my favorite titles, and I think where I kind of another spot where I turn the corner about a developer really respecting the player. So The Witness, if people don't know about it, it's made by Jonathan Blow, who created the game Braid in 2008, which is the beginning of some big Xbox Live indie movement. This game came out like 5 years ago. And basically, you just wake up, you're on an island, and the whole mechanic of the game is solving basically line tracing puzzles. And there's like not really any VO. There are no text boxes popping up telling you what's what. You just start walking, and it has a very Myst-like feel to it. It's a puzzle game. But, stepping into that world and how purposefully bare everything has been left really just lets your brain start to fill in all the gaps of like, well, what this world must mean. And it feels kind of like, if anybody ever, maybe I'm dating myself, but ever watched the TV series Lost back when it ran, you felt like the characters are on this island that just had all these weird mysteries they were always throwing at you. And if they didn't answer them, it was maybe almost even better because it was like you just wondering what was out there in the dark, sort of. And The Witness does this so well. And the puzzles require you to be so attentive to the environment to figure them out. Like you might look for a tree branch that's bent in a certain way to know how to finish a puzzle that's shaped like a tree. And once you realize that the game is everything is purposeful, like you just cultivate this like super intense attention. You're walking around, you just feel like you're, Neo looking at code, like, oh my God, everything is significant all of a sudden. And and the game is just not even really it's not handing you achievement sounds. It's not handing you points. There are no coins or anything like that. It's like just wind. There aren't even any animals in the soundscape. This is really intentionally done because they don't want to suggest that there are people there if there aren't. There are animals there if there aren't. It's just you walking.
To tell you about a new thing in the store?
No, there's nothing like that. It forces you to really make your own rewards. And anyways, it's just an incredible title if you're into games that kind of like ask you to fill in the gaps and really, respect your time, respect your intelligence, work on your imagination for you. Like I can't recommend it enough. And I just think it's like such a singular piece of design too, and following through with, you'll sometimes hear designers talk about, oh, we want to deliver X experience with this game. Man, I went and watched a talk of Jonathan Blow's from like 5 years earlier where he was speaking about getting The Witness ready. And he was saying, oh, I want to make a game about the feeling of epiphany. And like he 100% delivered on it with this game. And it's just like, it's a wild feat. But if you're into the Spartan vibes of Valheim, I would maybe give that one a spin.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I feel like
That's
I
cool.
should plug also that I just learned today that it's going to be free on from PlayStation March 25th. So if you can wait a couple days, you might be able to play it for free on the PlayStation. And now I'm not hashtag not an ad. Hashtag I just learned this. I thought it was cool. Sorry.
Awesome.
I was not paid for that segment. It's true.
Also, please pay me.
But I think, Tips, I think it's a good observation to reference Dark Souls, because as you mentioned, like in Dark Souls, it's really, they have a core setting, a core kind of like world that you can kind of feel through the world level design and immersion, but it's up to the player to kind of go and learn more, right? You have to actively go out to kind of go discover it. I think that is a really kind of good model to go, because like Kevin said, it's like, play, don't tell sort of thing. You don't want to just put the story right in the player's face and just have them talk to this NPC and that NPC and listen to this VO, right? It's more engaging for the player.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like if you do that really early as well, you create an expectation of the player that I'm going to be spoon-fed the rest of the story. So they actually stop exploring. And one of the things I'll point to again is the classic, the vanilla WoW cinematic. Opening cinematic. What is the story there? It's like you don't know about any bad guys or anything else. It's just you're going to be one of these people living in this huge, amazing world. That's it. The story is yours. Go get it. And that shifted over the time with cinematics to be like, here's the big bad, and this is the guy you're going to be fighting and saving the world, right? And so now players are on, they're sitting back in their chairs and waiting for the story to come to them rather than going out and seeking it and making it themselves.
But
Absolutely.
also, to be fair, I just wanted to say, like, also, I feel like we shouldn't feel like I feel like the audience shouldn't take away that we're shaming that kind of game, because there's still a place for those games, and they're still very satisfying games, especially if you look into the people who really flex into the narrative, things like the
Yeah.
Telltale games,
Well
or
said.
yeah, where you're like an active participant in the story, which is always really compelling, right? Even in classic WoW and modern WoW, you feel like you are an active participant in the story, even if the story is the same for you as it is for the other person next to you. It is still good design, and it is still a good game if they are force feeding you the story. It just obviously has to be a good story. So,
Yeah.
and
If
Telltale Games
what they set
fucking
out to
nails
do.
it.
Yeah, well said. If that's what they set out to do, then there's some amazing games out there that do just that. So yeah, and like you were saying earlier, what's the identity of your game? What are you trying to achieve? And there's high quality that can be achieved in either method.
Absolutely.
It worked for Cyberpunk. I mean, I think there was an expectation of that game feeling more sandboxy than it really is in practice. Like the AI is kind of thin on the ground. It's like an ocean wide and a puddle deep. But I thought that the mainline narrative, the quality of all the voice acting, the capture, the lighting, the cinematography of it was so good that like I just wanted to strap into the roller coaster and just do the entire thing. Like I didn't need to really make up my own story because it was just freaking awesome.
Yeah, agree.
Chris, I feel like your article kind of touches on some of this stuff about what developers might do to kind of take some of the guardrails off the player experiences and let players figure things out for themselves a little bit more. Like I think there's a kernel in your article talking about how really only an indie studio could pull off some of the stuff that Valheim did that like maybe you want to jump off of, because I think that trusting the player and letting them explore, like then you start to have the risk of, well, we don't know if the player might get frustrated or bounce off something and then they might quit. Whereas if you have a very scripted experience, you feel like you have more control over keeping them in the game somehow. I don't know. You have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think this is a good question for the group too, and I'd like to hear your point of view, because it is interesting that you keep seeing again and again. There's so many games that are having a huge impact on players that resonate with them, that are come from indie studios. They don't really come from these bigger studios, right? And I kind of wonder why that is. Like, I think part of the reason is just that these are kind of more narrow sort of games, maybe that the big shots at the studio feel like aren't worth the investment, or maybe it's just different motivations that the studio has and on how they want to greenlight games. Yeah, I think it's just really kind of fascinating, and we're in this sort of kind of like era now where people are investing in kind of the future that they believe in, and type of games that they want to see, and we're talking about democratization of all these different things, right? And so I think it's really, really interesting. Actually, I'm interested to hear what Rachel thinks, because you are working kind of at an indie studio. What is kind of the thoughts that you have, or your studio has?
And AFK.
Cool.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. No, it's no problem. Well, I mean, I don't know. What does everybody else think about that?
I think that it's a safe. So here's an example. If you make a pixelated, like crappy looking game, then that's going to be less attractive, right? If you make a more attractive game, then you have a higher adoption rate, right? And so I think that's all about making a safe bet. And so what they see are these like AAA games that keep getting bigger and bigger in scope, from 500 person teams to 1,500 person teams to now there's like a 2,000 person team, they're like cranking out. I'm not gonna like throw shade, because it's still like a monument of an IP, but and it's all about safety, right? And it takes a bold move, which is why I think that this is like the indie space, because they don't have the time or the money or the artists to really like lean into great graphics or immersive VO. And so I think that's why it's the default for AAA titles, is that it's a safer bet than making something that's either unattractive or unappealing in some way. And if you have the money and if you have the resources, you might as well do that. Because then if you could take a game like Valheim and you could put that AAA finish on it, if you could make it as beautiful as Mirror's Edge, and if you could make it, there's sometimes the boss heads will talk to you. If you could like VO those with, the guy that does Optimus Prime or something, like obviously it's going to be a more polished and sort of feeling like it's a more intentional experience. And so it absolutely doesn't make any sense for a AAA studio to not take advantage of the resources that they have.
I also think a lot of it is just where does it start? A lot of AAA studios start from a monetization or sort of profit margin like standpoint, and then they try to build a game around that, or they start from an asset standpoint. Well, we have this many artists that can create this much art, so we can slap some design on it. But a lot of the indie studios are starting from design first. And I think that's why, and everything serves that core, beginning. And that's why a lot of the best designed games are coming out of the indie studios.
Yeah, it just feels a little maddening, though, as a creative developer, and we're all creative developers here. It's just like, I feel like there's no shortage of ideas or really design-oriented, driven sort of ideas at the big studios. It's just challenging to get these games greenlit and kind of started within the studio, just because, like you said, Kevin, it's just a lot of it is like, there's a lot of gatekeeping of just, what is the, how are we going to be able to 10x this idea,
Right.
And which was funny because I was talking with someone in biz dev with Valheim, and they're like, well, I think they're going to churn out by May. I don't think they're going to be able to grow massively. I'm like, well, it probably really wasn't their motivation to do that,
Right. Yeah, and the other thing is just like how many people are creating assets and code and all the other things that and just management, like on those 1,500 person teams, right? How much is that of the personnel or just logistics, right, at that point, versus like how many designers, fewer and fewer designers seem to be like just doing that, like most studios, even ones that are starting up, are first thinking about, well, who's gonna draw everything, who's gonna animate everything, who's gonna code everything, and they're not thinking about who's gonna think up. They need one guy to think up the big idea, but they don't think about like how many lower level designers they're going to need to do all the little details that support that original vision. So I feel like there's a real imbalance as well of like asset creators versus just pure game designers. And so, and it's kind of showing, like we've seen a lot of really beautiful games that are pretty shallow when it comes to game design and not very inspired over the last few years or several years.
And I think that's a spectrum too. Like you're totally right. And it just depends on who your audience is. Like a movie, like if you make a B-roll horror film, you're not going to try to tell an amazing story like Memento or something like that. It's the same with video games. If you just want to give someone like you are an active participant in this war story that we're telling, or you're an active participant in, who cares? It's like you're killing Nazis. It's Wolfenstein or something. Then that's fine. Like not every game has to be super deep and complex and hard but yeah, I think I think you're totally right that's why the indie space is emerging so much. It's because people come up with a premise for a game and then they build everything else around that simple premise, like Untitled Goose Game. Like you're just going to be a goose and you're going to fucking cause trouble. And it was wholesome and it was fun and it was well designed and it was to the point of its purpose. And anyway.
Yeah, and for every Valheim and Untitled Goose, there's tons of them that are failures, right? Like that don't quite make it. But I love that its design is actually going on. But yeah, it's hard for companies to like back every idea. So they want to go for the sure thing, and the business side of it rears its ugly head. But here we are.
This is maybe a kind of loaded line of conversation given the people up on stage, but I'll just throw out that like grabbing little ideas like this and polishing into those fully arted experiences that require 1,500 person teams kind of has been Blizzard's game for the long time. Like that's sort of what they've been up to. And so I'll be curious to see if that's like still something that they end up doing going forwards, because the model, I feel like things just move so quickly now that you don't have a genre that just sits out there, diamond in the rough style, waiting to be picked up and polished for 2-3 years at a time, maybe even more. It seems like it's accelerated so much. Did any of you guys play Genshin Impact? I didn't really, but I just feel like the success of that game last year is kind of like a really strong counterexample to everything we've been talking about. In which, like, what I'm saying is my impression of that game, given how much everybody was just decrying, oh, it stole this from Breath of the Wild, it's just got these kind of these shameless, gotcha game mechanics and stuff in there. That feels to me like, Chris, is it you who always tells the anecdote about House of Cards and how they basically created it like algorithmically? It was Netflix seeing that people loved Kevin Spacey and they loved political drama and they loved whatever. And so they're like, why don't we just make a thing that has these attributes and ship it? And Genshin feels like that. And then it kind of killed last year. And so, I mean, I think that model still works. And I wonder if a more polished Valheim that takes some of this stuff up to heart kind of emerges, or would it feel false for being sort of more polished up? Like maybe the rawness is kind of what I want. I don't see a AAA studio just taking a leap of faith like the way Valheim does in terms of just being like, you're out here, figure it out.
Yeah, I don't think AAA studios would really understand why Valheim is good. So in their attempt to copy it, they would artify the heck out of it. They'd fix all the bugs, with lots of code, but they'd miss the magic and the reason why it's so good. And
or they just had their own idea of what the magic was. Like if you ever played Grounded by EA, like it was just a wholesome, fun survival game where sometimes you would fight an ant and it's the size of a dragon, and it was really wholesome, like in the same vein of Animal Crossing. There are games that are coming out that are trying to be the AAA, Rust or the AAA Valheim, and and again, it just matters what your premise is and what your goal kind of is. And I think that Grounded actually did a really good job, and I think the only reason that people churned off of it was just they wanted more, which is always a good problem to have,
Yeah.
Have any of you felt like? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's it was interesting because I was playing a Grounded a lot with a friend of mine, and then I heard about Valheim, and I'm like, why is Valheim getting so much attention when we already have Grounded, and Grounded's made by Obsidian, it's made by kind of a AAA studio, and I think the main differences between the two games, I agree with you, Candace. I think it has a lot of charm to it, and it's a really immersive sort of game, and I love the story and the Honey I Shrunk the Kids sort of vibe. But I think the differences between Valheim and that game is like is Valheim just so much more just like simple and open, as open interpretation to player. It's kind of the things we were talking about earlier, just about in Grounded they have a very set narrative and you're discovering bits of the story, and it has a storyline, right? And I think that kind of narrows the scope of the game in some ways. But I do definitely think it has to be a discussion among all bigger studios. They're all looking at Valheim right now and going, how could we kind of encapsulate this and grow it, right? And I think it's always going to be a challenge because, this is also a challenge with WoW, right? Where it's like, it's a PvE game. It's also a challenge with Genshin that you're talking about, Luka, right? It's just that you got to keep adding content. And so you have to have this big live ops team to build out all this stuff. And the players kind of go through it very quickly. And then, it just becomes very expensive and kind of hard to maintain. Of course, Valheim has like a creative sort of mode, and it's like up to the players to do things. I really think the next step for Valheim of how they grow is really just give more creator tools and let players mod it out. Like if you look at Skyrim, players are still playing Skyrim. It's still one of the most watched like games on YouTube, and it's all just mods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
And I want to spend I'm sorry. Just the idea of finishing Valheim. Like I've not played a game in a while that I felt so content to just sip. You know, I don't feel like I need to really rush with it. And I wanted to ask you all earlier, like, have any of you felt like you've kind of finished Valheim in terms of, well, I see the edge of the world and there's a big sign that says early access and come back later for, you know, mining mithril or whatever. And like, if you have, kind of what does that feel like? Like for me, I feel like I know that there are some tiers of ore beyond where I am now, but I just don't feel pressured to get to them. I'll be happy to get to them. Like I intend to get to them, but I'm not like, oh man, if I get to silver tonight, like that's gonna fix everything and make this game so much better. Like I know it'll be more of the same on the way up, and I'm kind of totally fine with it. I guess, how are you all pacing yourselves playing it? Like how does it feel to, you know, burn out on Valheim if anyone has, or what do you do past, you know, 60 hours? Like are you treating it differently?
I mean, I guess I can speak to that because I've played like 120 hours in the last 2 weeks. Also, by the way, I'm currently unemployed, so I'm between jobs
Unrelatedly,
right now.
yeah.
Yeah, I just don't start it right until the 29th. And so, and again, because I have that role where I like to provide for my friends. I've actually hit that wall now where I do want to see we've killed 3 out of the 5 bosses. I've heard that there will be up to 8 bosses eventually when the game actually releases. But I feel like, I don't know, getting the new ore just feels like going through the motions, and I feel like I've explored as much of the world as I'm going to see because I've found all the biomes. Like I know there's a winter biome that I'm not ready for yet, and I know there's a plains biome that I'm not ready for yet. So like I see it, and I think that's the problem, is I kind of saw the end, and now I'm just like, why do I? It's same thing happened to me with Breath of the Wild, to be honest. Like I never killed Ganon because I knew that once I killed Ganon, I would never do shrines. And what I actually liked doing was finding shrines and doing shrines. So yeah, I feel like I am at my point of burnout where I still want to provide for my friends. I don't feel the need to be on all day to do that anymore. And I feel like I could quit actually today and feel just as good as if I quit after I killed all 5 bosses.
Would you want to come back in a couple of years?
Like, no, and that's kind of like the weird point where I wanted to mention this earlier, but I think it's also, I am not a business oriented person at all. I'm very much a creative. But to me, I feel like a lot of studios and a lot of what y'all were talking about was like games as a service, right? Like, how are you going to add to this? How are you going to multiply this? Whereas I feel like Valheim, and this is just my opinion, obviously, but it would also be okay to me if I were to have shipped Valheim to say, this is my saturation point. You know, I'm not going to get more than I have now. And maybe I should just sunset this and just say, you know, this is the game. Thanks for playing. And maybe you'll look forward to the next title that I bring, but not continuing that game as a service.
Yeah, leaving happy and planning for people departing is totally fine. It is definitely interesting on the psychology though, and of like you knowing that the content is coming to an end and the dread you kind of feel in a way, like, oh no, it's running out. Shouldn't I just stop now before I get to that point? Like before I'm finally actually done. So yeah, you know, and Chris talks about this too, the race to stay ahead of people's ability to consume content by all the studios. But I think it's okay. I think it's okay for a game to have an end. I think especially if it's a really, really good, high quality experience, you know. I definitely think there are places they can take Valheim, but it's also okay that they don't, you know, try to turn it into another Rust or another game that's just like seasonal, or, you know, there's leagues and all this other stuff, like making it into an esport or, you know, whatever it is. Like they could go a lot of different directions, but it's perfectly fine just being what it is and being a really good example of that.
Tips, you still there?
I am still here.
Can you talk about this Valheim tournament? Like, what does that entail?
Essentially, it was a last man standing format where we invited 8 different, content creators slash community members, and they had 2 hours to farm as much materials and make whatever weapons they could. Essentially, 2 hours of just complete save zone. And then after the 2 hours, they could continue, but it was a free for all at that point. So if you ran into anybody in the world, you could kill them. And every time you killed somebody, you got, X amount of gifted subs, whatever it was. And, it just went to the very end till the last man was standing. And that was the end of the tournament.
It's interesting because you turned it into a battle royale. You turned it into
Yeah.
Hunger, basically. I love that.
Exactly. To be fair, the reason why we did it that way was less so. The whole point of the tournament was less so, we really want to turn Valheim into an esport, and it was more so kind of us testing our own, internal workflows when it comes to spinning up events. So Valheim just happened to be a game that a lot of us were enjoying, and we wanted to see, how quickly could we spin up any kind of, tournament in any kind of game. Let's use Valheim. And so what do we do? How do we structure it? How's this going to work? But we did enjoy it, and I think overall it just so happened that the format was pretty cool and fun to watch.
That's dope. I feel like
Yeah,
Valheim, the negative space, as we keep talking about within Valheim, it like really enables people to step in and be like, well, I'm going to create this extra layer of kind of meta game within it like that. Honestly, yeah, that sounds like so much fun. That sort of the player experience is what they bring to the game. Like, obviously, it was a huge part of vanilla that everybody always talks about. It was very intentional, but like, I am always just like so impressed, when I would tune into Asmongold to see the types of challenges he was creating within what felt like such a rigid, existing, story-driven, theme park game like Modern WoW. And like all the transmog competitions and everything like that. Like that user-generated content, I think comes more easily in Valheim, but...
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. That wasn't going anywhere. I just had to gush.
No, it was great. I think when it comes to sandbox games, one of the biggest criticisms, I can only speak from the player side, is that, often they're touted as these, endless adventures, and you can be who you want to be and do what you want to do. But sometimes, and again, this is just from the player side, it feels like that's touted as kind of an excuse for just not having very much content. Or maybe just the vision of an endless experience on the developer side is very different than what it is on the player side.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to see, like with Valheim, for example, you do have a lot of leeway to do a lot of really cool things. And sometimes, like, you're put in a sandbox in these games, and it is literally a sandbox, but you're not given a shovel, you're not given a bucket, you're not really given any tools to like realize the full potential of that sandbox.
Yeah, and then the other thing just about the sandbox thing is it still has to be designed. Like you're still trying to design the ability for players to find great experiences. Because if you just dump people into a sandbox, and like you're saying, don't give them any toys, then they're not going to make their own fun. A lot of times they're going to wait for you to give them something to have fun with. So you still have to design a sandbox game. But a lot of companies or a lot of games might not see that, like you're saying, it's an excuse just to like, oh, the players will figure it out. We'll just give them assets. But you still have to put some game design into it.
Yeah, Kevin, what is your thoughts on this? Because I think a big trend now in games and MMOs and virtual worlds and going forward, this is something Candace is going to have to maybe think about, is just like this concept of the metaverse, which is just like user-generated content, and basically players have more agency over the game. It's like kind of creating, like, they could basically take some of their... And Valheim kind of does this in sort of a way where you have your character, and there's all these servers, and when you go to them, you keep all of your stuff, right? Like, or well, it's whatever is on your character, right? But yeah, I think that's another really interesting part about Valheim, I think, and something that maybe we'll see more of in the future, is basically you just take your character and go to a different server in that game, in that world, and carry things with you.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I believed from very early on is that if you rely on the player base to create your content, most of your content is going to be garbage, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very
Like,
true.
there's a reason that, talent is just rare, and that's why, most companies hire the best talent that they can, well, that's available, and their resources, etc. But, for every guy, who's knocking out masterpieces, there's guys like me that are like drawn stick figures, right? So,
Yeah.
that's just the way the world works. So and this is where game design again comes in. It's like you have to create an environment that facilitates people creating great art. Like you have to still do the work to meet them halfway, to get them to create by giving them structure and to give them direction. And some people are just geniuses, and they'll take whatever you give them, they'll run with it. Like the guy that made the Millennium Falcon in Valheim, right? I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but
What?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so somebody did that, and it's just like, yeah, okay, there's people like that are going to do that, and the thing was massive, and it was amazing, right? But most of the time, people are just going to draw a penis, and that's it. That's the extent of what they can think of, right?
Right. Right.
And so it's like, okay, well, if you want, 0.1% of your world being a masterpiece like the Millennium Falcon and the rest just penises, and that's all you aspire to, then great, just let the community build what they want, but otherwise you're going to have to design and meet them halfway.
That actually reminds me of when I played Neverwinter, I think Neverwinter Online.
Yeah, Neverwinter.
They
Or
had I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But they did this thing where players could make dungeons, and there were like top voted dungeons. It was like the most badass thing I'd ever heard of.
Yeah.
And I played one that was like this narrative experience, and I was like, yes, girl, like I'm feeling this. This is so fucking cool. And then, but the top rated one was literally because they found out the rules of like, you can only make a dungeon this big, and here's how far apart the monsters that drop loot have to be.
Yes.
The most popular dungeon for 2 months running was called 50 Ogres in a Row. Right. And it was literally just like a hallway, a room, an ogre, a hallway, a room, an ogre, 50
and it was
times.
all about XP or reward rate.
Yes, because you got the most XP and the most rewards from it. It's like,
that's
the penis. That's the penis.
And right below that was just a bunch of god awful mess, right? Like there was like
you're right.
An amazing artistic experience, the ogre hallway, and then a whole lot of garbage, right? Of people trying. It's not like they're not trying, but most of the time people just there's a very small percentage of people that can actually be amazing content creators.
Yeah, I think you're so right with this, Kevin. And it's just, it's something humbling to think about, because whenever you look at like all these games that have creator modes and stuff like that, what are the things players always create? They always recreate things that are already created by professionals usually. Like they'll remake Disneyland or the Millennium Falcon, or they'll make a Game of Thrones area, right? Like they're kind of recreating these things. It's so hard to create something out of nothing, to make something new. And so, so I find that really, really interesting. And I think that's a challenge with the metaverse, in which like all this relying on UGC and things like Roblox and stuff like that. I think, it's interesting with Roblox, because if you ever played it, and, I spent a couple hours trying it out, a lot of the games in there are just like, I'm sorry, but they're not very good. And they're made by kids, right? And kids don't know any better and things like that. But then if you look at like Roblox's concurrency and the players who play it, it kind of, after like a certain age, it just drops off a cliff.
Right.
They just do not come back. And I think it's because novelty of being online with your friends at school and things like that, making your own games is great. But after a while, they have they get a bigger taste for something, a little more substantial.
And a lot of the game modes in Roblox are also just copies of other successful games. Like they have an Among Us in there. They've got a Battle Royales in there. They've got, prison escape modes, like it's just a bunch of, like, again, like you're saying, it's already been made by someone else and now it's being recreated here. So, and it's a similar problem with this idea that we're going to be, at some point in the future, we're going to be surrounded by really good programmatically generated content, like, And that's not coming anytime soon, because it's like, yeah, programmatically generated can be made really fast, but the quality level is going to be all over the place, and you still need a human being to parse through, all of the generated content and say, okay, well, this is actually good and this is actually bad. And so both styles of trying to approach success through either programmatically generated or user generated content, I think are real long shots.
It's such a gamble, dude. Like I worked on a game many years ago called Project Spark. That was my first game in the industry. Microsoft put it out, and this was before they bought Minecraft. At which point, it sort of felt like, why were you building this in the first place? But the game was a creator game. It was a tool set, world gen and stuff. And what separated it was that you could like a fork off this old game called Kodu or something like that, Kodu. There was like a rough visual coding language in the game, and you could put basically like these behavioral patterns or brains onto literally any object in the world that you wanted, and it looked kind of like a rebus. Basically, it was when icon do icon, very simple, but and it was this super powerful tool set. Like you could make the wildest shit that you wanted to in there, because you could be like, I'm gonna make a projectile gun that when my character equips it, and it's going to shoot out goblins, and then I'm going to run a bunch of math functions to make these goblins increase in size, and they have collision and do like you could bend the rules and break the game so easily. But most of the UGC that you would see, again, mirrored stuff that was kind of already out there, and we also shipped like an on rails kind of narrative with it that I just never really felt like it's not really the right way to try to get somebody into a UGC games, to give them like a linear story to just kind of romp through. It was a weird onboarding, and I feel like the problem with those UGC games is that it's this like siren song of, we'll just make the platform, and then the kids are just going to make all our content for us. And it's like, yeah, but if you don't get everything about that world exactly right and make the tools feel fun and make it pleasant to be in, no one's going to build shit in your game, because they just don't want to be there.
That's right.
Yeah. That game's offline now.
Yeah,
RIP. It was a good time though.
You can get some good stuff out of UGC, right? Like, I mean,
Oh,
many
for sure.
games have come out of editors like Dota from Warcraft 3, or Counter-Strike from Half-Life or whatever. But I think the key is that it needs to come out of an established game that has a big player base, that has good gameplay to work off of, right? Like no one created Dota out of just Game Maker Pro. It came out of Warcraft 3, and so I think that is a challenge with Roblox, with Manticore, and all these other solutions. Is just that it's just going to be hard for the player to reference something, in that it's harder to create something on a blank canvas than it is using existing blocks, right?
Yeah. And also I think the real trick is just if they're going to try this model where user generated content is the lion's share of what's made, they have to find better ways of getting the cream to get to the top, like advertising the amazing work that's actually being done. Because there will always be, like, what Minecraft is a great example, like for every just terrible thing that's made in Minecraft, there's tons of it, but there's also some amazing stuff in Minecraft, right? So advertising or getting people to see the things that are amazing and being able to participate in those experiences, I think should be one of the things that companies that are trying to rely on UGC look to making more visible, right? So, and you were talking about Neverwinter, Candace, and it's like, yeah, that they had the vote up system, right? But the vote up systems are always really sketchy, because they're community controlled, and people are going to upvote random things, especially in the age of like Twitch or influencers, right? It's like if Asmongold gives his thumbs up on a map on Minecraft, right? It's like, okay, well, suddenly there's 50,000 more, likes on that thing, for no other reason than he said, go do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because Steam ran into that problem too, and they had a really interesting solution where people can now tag the games, and so the most popular tags come to the top. So you could say like tag great design, or tag I love Asmongold, or like whatever.
Right,
And you
right.
can see why
Yeah.
people are voting favorably for these
Yeah, and
games.
I read reviews on Steam a lot, and so many of them are value analysis, right? Like, not worth it, like thumbs down, or worth it, thumbs up, right? They don't comment about the art or the game design or how satisfying experience they had. It's just, how can they charge $10 for this DLC, right? Like, which is a totally different thing. Is this game good? Will I enjoy it? So it's, yeah, again, it's community controlled, popularity, which has just a really unpredictable metric for determining what's good.
Just a reminder too that Valheim is only $20. Like, whoever was the one that settled on that as the sweet spot number, I think that is just such a pivotal thing. Like, that's just enough that you're like, this isn't going to be shovelware, but if my
Right.
friends stop playing it after this weekend, I'm not going to be that mad about it. And it also makes it easy for you to go, well, if they never added anything more to this, I've already spent 2 weekends playing my friends. It was $20. I played it for like 20 hours. Like, I'm good.
Yeah. But how many
Loop
people are
Hero is the
like,
other one,
oh,
right?
what we could do? We could make our own Valheim and then charge $60 for it.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I can't see a AAA studio throwing something out there for $20. It's
Right. You got to pay for all the commercials, right? On the Super Bowl.
yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, I mean, this has been really awesome. I think, we're a little over a half an hour. It's just a really great conversation. But I want to be mindful of everybody's time. And
Sorry, I just brought someone new up. Do you want to?
Sure, yeah. Hey.
We'll answer one more question.
One more.
Yeah. So sorry I jumped in late. Can you guys hear me okay?
What's up, Nana?
Yes,
we hear you.
So one of the things I really found really great about Valheim is that the design was like laser focused, right? It was they're going to be about building, and you can be as creative as you can be within the rules that they set. And there's going to be some RPG. There's bosses, and then like progression system with that. And they were able to create this big world with these two rule sets at a very small, like gigabyte level, right? And so one of the questions is, why do AAA studios really struggle with like scope creep to the point where it takes years and years to develop, and they can't seem to have a design as laser focused as what Valheim put out?
Right. And I think this comes back to one of the points I made earlier. And that's 100%. It's one of the things I love about Valheim. Everything in that game has a really distinct purpose. There's no waste. There's no fat on that game at all, right? But I think a lot of AAA studios have tons of asset creators and not enough game designers, right? So just go make assets is sometimes the plan. We don't know exactly where this game is going yet, but we know we're going to need assets, right? So they end up making 100 assets, but they only really have a good, well-designed function for, say, 50 of them, right? And it's like, well, what do we do with the rest of the assets? Well, it's just more assets. It's good, right? So you throw them in, but they start to feel, it feels like waste. It feels like, a bunch of extra clutter or, whatever it is. So rather
it's the
than
95% of doors in Cyberpunk you can't open,
right.
Right.
So I think that's one of the big problems is just, it doesn't necessarily start from a design standpoint. Like, and that's why Valheim has been so impressive to me. It's just so design focused. They come up with exactly what they need to fill a specific spot in the game, has a very specific purpose, and then they add it. And that's it. And that's all they have time for, right? That's all they have the resources for, right? They're doing the bare minimum kind of because they have to in a lot of ways. They don't have that problem anymore because they've been so successful. So we'll see what they do now. But a lot of other companies don't, either consciously or unconsciously are just putting in too much waste in their games.
Yeah, I mean, like, the other thing too is like great creativity comes from constraints, right? And so I think being able to have less people, it just keeps you focused. And I think focus is so important. And I think when you have more people in a team and more things, you have more sort of like cooks in the kitchen, essentially. And it's very easy for it to just balloon out and get, like you said, just kind of get, so complicated and, off the rails.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to add to that. I think that part of it is just the human problem where communication is hard and vision alignment is hard. And the fewer voices you have in the room, the more controlled your vision is. Not to say your vision is better, but it's under control, right? But when you have, and I'm going to pick on this game, even though I think it's a fucking masterpiece of a game. But when you have a game like Red Dead Redemption, where you have people who are in charge of this and you have people that are in charge of that, someone is going to make it their white whale to make sure that the horse testicles shrink when it's cold. You know, like they have the bandwidth and the time, and that's the level of fidelity that they care about. Whereas, like, I feel like that kind of thinking only comes from whenever you kind of, you know, that wasn't part of the master vision of the game. You know,
Okay.
that was just something that serendipitously happened. Is a great player story and is amazing, but also.
And some of those ads are amazing, and some of those ads are pointless, right? So there's also the full breadth of possibilities there. But yeah, at the end of the day, none of those served, you know, the core vision of the game, right?
I mean, I think I've not really played Red Dead 2. I played a lot of the first one, but I don't want to say it's an unfortunate example, but that is a game that actually got out the door and won accolades for like all of the polish that it did have. I'm not going to say that Shrinking Horse Nuts, you know, made it, but in playing Cyberpunk, all of the complaints that I would see were people relating it to how, well, oh, in Red Dead, you know, 2, the fourth wall never breaks. There's no problems with any of that at all. They covered everything. And like, the truth is, though, that, you know, 95% of the studios that ever attempt to polish something like that will just sink under their own, you know, they'll run out of money. Rockstar can afford to do that, and they can afford to take 10 years because they have a money printing machine in the basement called GTA Online that they can't turn off. So they can do whatever they want. But even then, though, you know, just to soften that a little bit, I feel like, as Chris said, you know, real great imagination and design comes from constraints. And there are plenty of stories of, you know, companies with infinite money machines on that manage to not really pull it together too, because that freedom can be kind of a prison in its own right. You know, you feel like there's no option you shouldn't explore because you're probably able to pay for it. And then what's not unlimited in those scenarios, even if money seems like it is morale and attention span. And then people get tired of, it's 8 years and I haven't shipped a game, you know? So there is another resource that you could exhaust even in that spot.
Yeah, for sure. Also,
I appreciate you answering my question.
Just in general,
I love the thoughts. Yeah.
No problem.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all I was going to say. Yeah, but go, Chris.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say as well, like, you know, I just want to throw this in there too, just because I just thought about it. But, you know, one thing I love about Valheim too, with its simplicity is, you know, the kind of crypts, the dungeons, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it feels like a dungeon, right? It feels like a core fantasy dungeon. I feel like, you know, in MMOs, even WoW, I feel like you know, I love the dungeons in WoW, right, for what they are. But I think they've kind of drifted from what the ultimate fit, like kind of the original fantasy of the dungeons were, which is like this kind of tight, like, you know, space that feels like, you know, dangerous and dark and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so,
but
I mean,
at the same time, they're very rudimentary, right? Like the layouts are really simple, and
I get lost in them, but okay.
Right, but it's just to the point where it's like they've done so much with so little, and it's because of the execution, right? Like, it's still a very satisfying experience to go into a dungeon and clear it out, you know? And again, the feel of it and the sound and the lack of light and, you know, a little bit of combat, a little bit of looting. And, but yeah, when you think about it from like that AAA standpoint, it's like, really, this is your dungeon? Right? Like, where are the vistas? Where are the, you know, like the big explosions, the giant cold cauldron of molten metal being poured into, you know? It's just like they didn't need all that, you know. Certainly it would be better in some cases with that, but yeah, it's super simple but super well executed.
I think for me, it kind of hit some of so like when I talk about core RPG stuff, it's like I feel a real sense of progression, and then as I get stronger, I go back to the places where I used to struggle in, and I just destroy them now because I'm smarter, but I'm also stronger. My gear is better, and I progress farther in the game. And there's a real level of satisfaction in that. But even with like the dungeons, right? They are super simple. They're easy to navigate, but you still have to start learning how to deal with like the different, hurdles that they throw at you. But it did kind of remind me, like I'm a classic WoW guy, but like it did remind me of my first trips to like Dead Mines. I'm actually going into this dungeon, or a better example is probably Wailing Caverns, which really just feels like this kind of dungeon place that exists in the world, and I'm going to go adventure to that place and find what's in there. And it really hit that note for me really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, this is kind of a long comment, but one I wanted to illustrate about Valheim sending a really strong message. Something I talk about on my stream. In fact, I just had a huge rant about it. But we're constantly being told that the gaming community has changed over the years. Now we know everything much quicker, and everybody's min-maxing everything. And Valheim's success is such a strong message that this is not true, that there's still a huge audience for people that just want to jump in, not be spoiled, explore the world, learn as we go. Because if it were true, what people say all the time, then people would have just watched a couple videos on how to speedrun Valheim, a week after it came out, and been bored with it almost instantly, right? But Valheim was super popular, and that's because it was such a wonderful thing to explore, such a wonderful thing to grow and learn in, and a new experience, and it was just really satisfying. So I think people should take notice that we're still hungry for these types of games, and this idea that it can't be done because Twitch exists or YouTube exists or the gaming community is min-maxing everything and spoiling everything way too fast is just not true.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what Candace was saying earlier about like, Breath of the Wild being like, she didn't want to kill Ganon or whatever because it would end the game. And, I think Valheim does a really good job of making it about the journey rather than the destination,
Yeah.
And that's usually what kind of games adjacent to kind of Valheim or in that area kind of can go wrong, is where it becomes about getting to the end. And you're right that I feel like it's all about kind of exploring and pacing yourself and the immersion there. Yeah.
Well, that was really awesome, guys.
Yeah, very much. Loved it.
Yeah.
Load.
So yeah, great question, Nano. You triggered us to add another 20 minutes. That's great. No.
You're welcome.
But yeah. Yeah, but thanks for everybody for joining, and this has been really great and awesome, a great test bed here. Clubhouse is still kind of really closed off. It's invite only still and iOS only and all that, but this is something that I think could have a lot of potential and really fun conversation to add and meet new people and things like this. So yeah, we'll do it again, and yeah, do you guys
Thanks very much for putting it together and for the invite.
Yep. Everyone have a good night.
Fun
Thanks.
talking with you, Kevin. All right,
Cheers.
thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye,
See ya.
everybody. Thanks again.
See ya.